Alright, so I'm going to show you particles within After Effects, which is a really neat way of generating everything from water to snow to fire to sparkles, any kind of cool stuff that is created and manifested that you can think of. So I don't need any pre-existing assets. I'm just going to create a new composition here and call it test. I'm going to make it just standard web video size, but that doesn't matter. Click OK. And I'm going to add a solid by saying layer new solid. As you already know, solids are just a way of putting down a layer of pixels within After Effects that you can apply effects to. And we need this in order to generate the sparkles and whatnot from the particle system. So therefore the color doesn't matter because that will totally be controlled by the particles effect. So I'm just going to click OK, and I've got this plain little white solid here. So now what I'm going to do is I could find particles within my effect palette, or I could just type it in with my effects and presets setting over here. So I'm going to start typing in particle, and all I've got to get to is part, and you can see the three options come up right away. There are other things that create particles within After Effects, but these are the three main ones: CC Particle Systems 2, CC Particle World, and Particle Playground. I would probably work with them in that order. Particle World and Particle Playground are decidedly more complex, but therefore they have more options. Right now I'm just going to show you CC Particle System to get you more familiar with some of the terms and things that you can do with a particle. So I'm just going to drag and drop that onto my solid. And initially you won't see anything because the animation hasn't started. It will automatically add animation, and you can see that if I scrub my playhead through, by default, I have this spark effect. Kind of looks more like spaghetti to me, but it's supposed to be sparks. And you can see it just animates over time and continues doing what it's doing. I'm going to move the playhead a little bit in so I can see what I'm working with. If I just work from the beginning, I see nothing. So I'm just going to slide in a little bit. And I'm going to take a look at my options up here. One of the first options you see is birth rate. Birth rate and death rate are things that are specific to After Effects, usually when you're talking about particles. And it simply means how many things are born a second, how many things die a second. It's one of those really glum designer terms like bleeds and gutters and things like that. So I can decrease the birth rate, and you can see that I've got a much more shallow thing of sparks than I did if I increased that to be this giant mass of noodles coming at you. So you can see the birth rate is really easy right away to affect, and it has a stopwatch next to it, meaning that I could change that over time. I also have longevity, which is how long they live before they die. If I decrease that, you could see I get it where it's more just like a little sparkler or fireworks effect. But if I make the longevity longer, you'll see that they last longer in time. Now you might also notice a color shift when I play with the longevity. That's because if I was to twirl down my other options here, you would see that I have a birth color and death color that it's switching between. So when it's about to die, it switches to red, and that's why the color is changing when I adjust the longevity. And you can see that that's extremely easy to change, as it's just a color picker type thing. We'll come back to particle in just a second. I'm going to twirl on these other options, being producer and physics. Producer lets you control where your sparks or particles are emitting from. So I can either just grab it by its little center point and move it, or I can adjust it with the scrubber, or just click on this little target thing and put it up wherever I want. I mentioned that the default kind of just looks like a spray. I want this to actually be more rain-like. I want it to be coming down from above. So I'm going to set the position to just be a little bit off the stage, so it's up and above out of the screen. And then I'm going to spread it apart using radius X and radius Y. Initially your particles are going to come out like water out of a hose. And if you want to spread it out so it's like rain or snow or something like that, you just have to change the radius X and Y. So you can see if I increase this that it kind of spreads out over everything, as opposed to if I minimize it, it gets it back to where it's just from a focused place. Radius Y does the same thing, only up and down, since it's the height. So I can change that And just to see this a little better, I'm actually going to add another solid of just a different contrasting color, like black. I'm going to put it behind everything else just so that I can better see what's going on without the grid going on. So here you can see that just by playing around with my settings, I created some kind of crazy 80 grass effect. I'm just going to wrap that up in a preset and call it a day. So I'm going to go back to my white solid, which is the one I've applied this to. You've seen the position X and Y. I'm going to make this, I'm actually going to reset it just so we can observe some of these other options because they won't be as obvious when it's spread out like this. So if I hit reset, we're back to the noodle shower. And under physics, we have different types of animation. This is called explosive, which is the default. I also have fractal explosive, twirl, which you can see kind of has like a wave kind of thing, twirly, which is pretty similar, vortex, which will go up like a cyclone, including fire, which also goes up. And then you can also have direction or sideways kind of thing. So there's a lot of different options as far as what kind of animation it emits, including the velocity and gravity and resistance. These are all really important for controlling the animation. I'm going to reduce the birth rate so we can see a little bit better here. And watch what happens when I increase the velocity. See how it comes out a lot faster? Okay, so the velocity is the speed that it emits at. I could drop that way down so it's more like a hose, or I can make it a lot more advanced. You can see how easy it is to change that. And remember, all of these have stopwatches next to them, so you can easily animate them along the way. Inherent velocity has to do with kind of the parent-child relationship. We'll talk about that in another time. I wanted to show you what's a little bit more powerful, which would be gravity. You can increase or take away from the gravity to control which way they're going to go. So you can either have it be like heavy gravity that's pulling it down, or an absence of gravity so it's getting pulled up, as if it was in space or something like that. I usually have gravity set at 0, but depending on what kind of effect you want, who knows what you can have. You also have resistance, which is the velocity is how fast it's emitted, but the resistance is pushing on it as it comes out. So you can use this if you want it to kind of slow down as it gets further away from its source. But that's a really fun thing to play with too, is the resistance of how it's going to be pushed back. And I've got some more specific examples to show you in just a moment, and I did not mean to zoom in that close. I also can change the color map. I talked about the color and the transfer mode. You could change the direction that it goes. So if you wanted to make it revolve, you could, or do an angle. Now, these are all very specific things that you can change. I think where you get the most power from, however, is going to the particle drop-down. Under particle drop-down, you can choose the particle type. And so far, we've just been playing with line, which is the default. I'm going to zoom in a little bit here and choose the next option, which is star. You can see how that has a nice little star effect. I also can do shaded sphere, or faded sphere, which is very similar. I also do shaded faded sphere, bubbles. And remember, at any time I could change the color on these just by choosing something else. Maybe I want these to be blue and white. You can see that's a lot more bubbly. I also can do polygons. Kind of looks like spikes or something. Tri-polygons, quad polygons. Cubes are pretty cool just because they have that 3D-ness to them. You can also do other types of textures. But you've got quite a few options here as far as what you can choose from. I'm going to go back to star just because that's kind of a fun one to play with. And notice that you've got quite a few options here. Under particle, you also have birth size and death size, which I mentioned a little bit earlier. You have a birth and death color, you've got a birth rate, death rate. Here you actually can control the size. So I can make them start off really small and get really large before they fade away. And that really changes the look of what you're looking at. You also can change the size variation. So maybe they don't vary that much, or maybe they have a lot of variation between the two.